'Twas the day after Christmas when all through the place there were arguments and depression, even Mom had a long face. The stockings hung empty and the house was a mess. The clothes didn't fit, Dad was under stress. The family was irritable, the children were not pleased. The instructions for the swing set were written in Chinese. The bells no longer jingled and no carolers came around. The sink was stacked with dishes and the tree was turning brown. The stores were full of people returning things that failed, and shoppers were discouraged. Earlier purchases were now on sale. 'Twas the day after Christmas, joy had disappeared. The only hope on the horizon were bowl games on New Year's. Perhaps you need to take a deep breath and maybe pat yourself on the back, or whatever you need to do. Maybe pat yourself on the back for surviving yet another Christmas. Perhaps a pat on the back for a memorable meal. Perhaps you tried a new recipe, or maybe you just redid a successful old recipe. Maybe a pat on the back because you didn't gain more than 10 pounds, or maybe you were smart enough to not even get on the scale. Perhaps you responded differently to a family situation, maybe positively. Maybe you responded differently to something that was anxious or threatening. Brenda Roberts of Stone Mountain, Georgia, is a Sunday school teacher, and she was reading the story of Jesus' birth to her daycare children one Sunday. As usual, she stopped to see if they understood, and she asked them, "What do we call the three wise men?" And a bright 5-year-old said, "The three maggots." The teacher corrected her, "What gifts did the Magi bring, baby Jesus?" And that same 5-year-old replied, "Gold, Frankensteins, and Smurfs." After reading this scripture passage this morning, perhaps you're thinking that you'd like to have the understanding of a mere child. This is a difficult passage to understand and even comprehend, especially after the manger and silent night. The holidays are wonderful, but I'm always ready to get back to the way things were, maybe back to normal if there's such a thing. It's now time to take down the Christmas decorations, to take down the manger scene, and to safely store it away. This morning's scripture passage suggests anything but safely stored away. I appreciate what one commentator shares on this. Matthew's account of the Holy Family's trial suggests putting the manger scene away is wrong. Perhaps we should put away the shepherds since they had returned to their fields, and maybe we should put away the Magi since they've returned to their distant homes. But he suggests that it might be a good idea to keep out the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, all alone, just the three of them, facing the terrors and trials, the reality in front of them. All the visitors had gone. The sheltering barn is no longer on the horizon. No friendly oxen, no cuddly sheep. And then we should move the Holy Family to another location in our church or our homes. Perhaps another location looking out on the larger world, on our communities, even places where we wouldn't even think of going. The world where there is still violence and crime and terror. The real story of Christmas is one in which we don't try to cover up and hide the reality around us. It's tempting to want to safely tuck ourselves away and hide from reality, maybe into a world of nostalgia. But that wouldn't be reality, would it? But that's the kind of world we live in. It's a harsh world, even a cruel world. It seems like every time we turn on the news, we hear something about discrimination, hunger, poverty, gangs, violence, you name it. This is not the secure and happy world that we want for our loved ones. And we don't have to go too far to see or experience tragedy. Tragedy strikes us close to home. Loved ones are taken from us when we least expect it. We can't avoid it. Today is not so different than Jesus' day. John spoke of the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, though the darkness keeps trying. Humanity has a way of just, being humanity. We live in a violent, cruel world, and life can be hard. Becky and her family right now are struggling with the loss of Janine. That's not what they wanted, especially at Christmas. We'd like to think that we can get a break, even a respite, for just a few days around Christmas. We'd like to get a break from things that provoke fear and anxiety and uncertainty. Today's scripture passage lets us know that we are not going to get a break. Matthew, the gospel writer, reveals the truth of the human situation. For Mary and Joseph, there are so many things to think about, to marvel and wonder. The meaning of Jesus' birth, so momentous and filled with hope. The promise of his life. It's so hard to wrap their minds around. The infant Jesus had just received extravagant gifts from the Magi, exotic visitors from afar. And after they had departed, Mary and Joseph were perhaps still marveling over them, and then Joseph has this bad dream. A nightmare is more like it. The angel appears and delivers an urgent message to Joseph. Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for and destroy him. With this warning in mind, Joseph took Mary and the infant Jesus, and they fled into Egypt. Herod, in a rage of fear and envy, had slaughtered all the male children in and around Bethlehem that were 2 and under. Herod is out to search for and kill their child. Herod has the authority and the means to do it. So this is not an idle threat. This is for real. I can only imagine the flurry of activity as Mary and Joseph are trying to get their things together just as fast as they can to get out to the the road that leads to Egypt. Herod had waited to hear from the Magi. They had come from the east following the star that announced the birth of Jesus. He had instructed them that when they found the newborn child, they were to return and let him know where he was so that they too could worship him right. The Magi, in a dream, received revelation that they should not go back to Herod, so they returned to their country by another route. The nightmare doesn't end when Mary, Jesus, and Joseph arrive in Egypt. We read in Scripture, when Herod saw that he'd been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated. He sent and killed all the male children in and around Bethlehem that were 2 and under. Herod had no intention of worshiping the newborn king. He intended to do him harm. King Herod. History books, strangely enough, call him Herod the Great. He came from a powerful family. His father and grandfather were both public administrators who had widened their base of authority. He was a domineering king. He was a capable leader, but he was also notoriously cruel. He executed 3 of his sons as well as his second wife. So cruelty had become a family tradition. It was his son Herod Antipas who had John the Baptist beheaded. This was the kind of man that Herod was. We don't know how many children were killed, but Bethlehem was a small village, so historians say that no more than 20, around between 20 and 30 were killed. It's hard to imagine the depth of their grief. Despite wanting to kill the child, Herod died. Upon the death of Herod, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph. The angel tells him to get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are now dead. Herod is gone, but Archelaus, his son, a man just as cruel as his father, is now reigning over Judea. And naturally, Joseph was afraid to go there. And we read his fear is confirmed by his 3rd dream. After being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee, and they made their home in a town called Nazareth. What a horrible conclusion to the Christmas story, isn't it? This is not what we are imagining we would read. We are not expecting to read this. It just doesn't seem to fit in with the beautiful Christmas story, does it? What are we to make of this? If this was the first time we were reading this passage, the Christmas story, this is definitely not what we would have imagined. Jesus starts his childhood fleeing as a refugee, and in the midst of this, unspeakable horror takes place. Perhaps it is time to put all of this away. When we sense a threat, especially to a loved one, I think all of our alarms go off and we want to protect our loved ones, especially a child. Our first instinct is to want to protect and